Hello, my name is Russell Myers. Welcome to Issues Unite. Let's talk about violence. A lot of people are judgmental of protesters breaking windows, burning books, etc. They call this violent behavior. Now, by no means do I support or condone the destruction or theft of property. I do not condone the burning of books at all. Well, except the Mueller report. Even in that case, it should be preserved as evidence of criminal behavior by our intelligence agencies. Spray painting graffiti on buildings and statues is unsightly. That's kind of the point, isn't it? However, that's not violence. It's an inconvenience. Paint can be washed off by one means or another. Stopping traffic is an inconvenience. Most protests have cleared ways for emergency vehicles such as fire trucks and ambulances to pass. So claiming that it places lives at stake is not accurate or truthful in most cases. No, it's doubtful that they will clear a path for police vehicles, especially when it is police conduct that is being protested against. But stopping traffic, that is not violent. I deeply oppose the presentation of protesters as being violent unless they act in some way that harms human beings, which is exceedingly rare for leftist protesters. It has been shown clearly that when violence erupts, it was most often initiated by the authorities or right-wing infiltrators attempting to make the protesters look bad. The same is true of looting. The biggest problem is what leads to this violence or large-scale peaceful protests. At this point, it has taken decades of attempts through peaceful legal means of solving problems, only to have the problems remain or even get worse over time. Now, it is violence that is visited upon the members of our society which lead to such revolts against authorities and against the status quo. Here's a small example of what I consider to be actual violence. The destruction of human lives, individuals, families, homes, neighborhoods, entire communities brought about by the war on drugs. How many children have been caught in the crossfire or lost parents to death, permanent injury, or incarceration for nonviolent possession? What is that child's outlook on authority from that day forward? Some will claim the person was doing what they should not have been doing or been where they should not have been. That's not always true. A lot of the time it's not. Even if it were, do we condemn disabled veterans for being wounded in a country where we have no business? This destruction based on chemical dependence, a recognized illness which is treatable, is violence. It is completely unwarranted violence, mostly inflicted upon people of color. I find it violent when lives and communities are destroyed by capitalism. Once thriving neighborhoods or entire towns driven into poverty and abandonment because of changes wrought by corporate interests, closing of plants so that jobs can be exported to other countries, and so forth. I find it violent when children go to bed hungry, wake up and go to school hungry, suffering physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, developmentally, and academically. I find it violent when minority citizens are forced to walk past memorials or symbols to the historic characters and systems which once oppressed them or their ancestors. A constant reminder that such oppression and social division is still very much present, just hidden under the surface. No, I do not find it violent when these memorials are struck down and destroyed. No human being is injured in that process. I find it violent when people fear for their lives when they see police lights in the rearview mirror, not sure if they will survive that encounter with authorities that are tasked with protecting them from threats. Too often, those authorities pose the greatest risk, the greatest threat to freedom, livelihood, health, and life itself that anyone can imagine. I find it violent when people are thrown out on the streets due to lack of income brought about by an unfair system that left them unable to sustain a basic existence. I find it violent when people are unable to afford life-maintaining medications or treatments because they cannot afford them. I find it violent when poorer elderly people resort to eating dog food to survive. I find it violent for a fully qualified and experienced person to be denied a job or a promotion based on their color, race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion. I find it violent when people are forced to work multiple jobs in the effort to earn enough for basic existence, subjecting their bodies and minds to stresses which damage and age them prematurely with no real advances to show for it. I find it violent when citizens of this country are allowed to suffer illness, injury, and death without medical care or go bankrupt, sometimes even if they have insurance, paying for that needed care. I find it violent when the taxes we pay are ripped from public coffers, handed in massive sums to corporations which use the money to inflate the wealth of executives and rich stockholders. While our society declines, our citizens do without things considered basic needs by other societies. I find it violent when the voices of the people are ignored by elected officials and the media, who then force oligarchy-friendly agendas onto us. I find it violent when those of us who fight for systemic reform have our words and voices distorted, censored, and silenced, our names and reputations slandered. I find it violent when our country invades or destroys another country, displacing and killing millions of citizens for the sake of corporate profits and U.S. government imperialism. I find it violent when the people of this country are subjected to intentionally deceitful propaganda intended to sow division, fear, and hatred. Unless you have experienced the effects of these examples firsthand, you may disagree with my judgment of them as violence. I assure you, while not all have the same effect as physical assault, they are definitely violent. They are forms of abuse which traumatize the mind, heart, and soul and often the bodies of those who have been subjected to them. They leave lasting impacts which are difficult at best to overcome. The reason we accept these conditions is because we are told, taught, educated, propagandized, indoctrinated, informed that these things are normal and should be considered normal. Nothing about this is normal or acceptable. The absolute first step in changing our system is changing ourselves, our perspective, the way that we see things. Each of us has a small voice inside us which tells us when our words and actions and attitudes are harmful and outright wrong. We have to listen to that voice. Shut out the platitudes of the system of greed and hate that is forced on us daily and conditioning us to this system, desensitizing us to what can only be considered atrocity. Question the narrative. Demand what we know is right and fair for all of us. Stop being selfish. Stop being self-centric. Stop being divisive and hateful. Because you are doing harm in this way. All right, that's going to be it. Please share this video. Talk about these subjects. If you can, please donate $1 a month to help expand the channel. And I hope you have a good day.